The night this man died, nothing looked violent at first glance. No screams reported, no forced entry, no obvious struggle, just a wife standing in shock, hands shaking, voice cracking, telling police, "I don't understand. We were just fine." But here's the question that would haunt investigators from the very beginning. Was she witnessing a tragedy or performing one? Before we go any further, if you're drawn to real stories where trust turns deadly and family becomes the crime scene, like this video right now, and if true crime that goes deeper than headlines interests you, subscribe to Winds of Thought, because the details matter here. Now ask yourself this: how well do you really know the person you sleep beside every night? Because in this case, the most dangerous threat wasn't outside the home. It was already inside. The call came in just after midnight. A woman reported her husband unresponsive inside their house. Paramedics arrived quickly, but it was already too late. He was pronounced dead at the scene. At first, everything pointed toward a medical emergency. No weapon in sight, no broken furniture, no blood splatter that screamed violence. And his wife, calm enough to answer questions, yet emotional enough to seem believable, repeated the same sentence over and over. "I loved him. I would never hurt him." But investigators have learned one thing the hard way. The quietest crime scenes often hide the loudest lies. As police began their routine questioning, small details started to feel off. Not wrong enough to accuse, just wrong enough to remember. She knew the exact time he stopped breathing, down to the minute. She mentioned details no one had asked for. And when officers explained the next steps, including an autopsy, her reaction shifted. Not grief, not fear, but irritation. Why would a grieving spouse be annoyed by an autopsy? That single moment planted the first seed of doubt. Friends described the couple as normal. No public fights, no police reports, no dramatic social media posts. But behind closed doors, the marriage was quietly cracking. Financial pressure had been building for months. Arguments that never escalated into shouting, but lingered, unresolved. Control issues masked as concern, jealousy disguised as love. And here's the disturbing pattern investigators often see in betrayal crimes. The motive rarely explodes, it simmers. If this is already raising red flags for you, drop a comment and tell me. What do you think is the most dangerous warning sign in a marriage? Silence, control, or blind trust? As detectives dug deeper, they learned something critical. In the weeks leading up to his death, the husband had confided in a co-worker. He felt watched, managed, trapped. He was considering a major decision, one that could change everything. And that decision may have set a countdown in motion. When the autopsy results came back, the case took a sharp turn. The cause of death was not natural. It wasn't an accident. And it definitely wasn't sudden. The evidence pointed to something far more unsettling: intent. At that moment, the grieving widow narrative began to collapse. Because if his death was planned, then the shock she displayed that night wasn't confusion. It was strategy. And here's the chilling truth. Most betrayal murders don't happen in rage. They happen after calculation. In part 2, we're going to uncover what investigators found inside the marriage. The hidden resentments, the silent power shifts, and the behavior that suddenly made sense after it was too late. So stay with me. Like this video to keep this story alive in the algorithm. And make sure you're subscribed, because what comes next exposes how easily love can be weaponized. Because once trust becomes a tool, home is no longer safe. The marriage didn't collapse overnight. It eroded quietly, day by day, behind closed doors where no one was watching. By the time investigators began reconstructing the couple's life together, one thing became clear. This wasn't a sudden act of violence. It was the final move in a long, invisible power struggle. Before we go deeper, pause for a second and think about this question. How many warning signs can exist before we finally call something dangerous? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you're finding yourself pulled into this case, make sure you're subscribed, because what we're uncovering now changes how this death is understood. On the surface, their life looked stable. A shared home, a routine, no public scandals. But stability can be an illusion, especially when control hides behind politeness. Friends later told police that the husband had slowly become isolated. He stopped showing up to gatherings, stopped answering messages. Even at work, co-workers noticed he seemed anxious, distracted, like someone constantly watching the clock. One colleague recalled him saying something chilling just weeks before his death. "It's easier to agree than to argue. I just want peace." That sentence mattered more than anyone realized at the time. Investigators started pulling phone records, text messages, financial statements, and a pattern emerged. His wife controlled nearly everything: money, schedules, decisions. She framed it as helping, but the reality felt different. Purchases he didn't authorize, messages deleted from his phone, passwords changed. This wasn't chaos. It was quiet domination. Psychologists who later reviewed the case described it as a coercive dynamic, where one partner slowly strips the other of independence while maintaining a calm exterior. No bruises, no screaming, just pressure, and pressure builds. The most critical discovery came from a private message he sent just 10 days before his death. It was short, direct, and devastating. He was planning to leave, not immediately, but soon. He had spoken to a lawyer. He had started documenting finances, and he told one person he trusted that he was afraid of how she would react. Here's the question investigators ask themselves: what happens when control is about to be taken away from someone who depends on it? The answer, in cases like this, is often escalation. When police confronted the wife with this information, her demeanor shifted. The shock softened, the tears slowed, and her words became carefully chosen. She denied knowing anything about plans to leave, denied arguments, denied conflict. But denial doesn't erase evidence. Toxicology results revealed something even more disturbing. On the night he died, substances were found in his system, substances he had no prescription for, enough to weaken him, enough to confuse him, enough to make resistance nearly impossible. The house showed no signs of forced struggle because there didn't need to be one. This wasn't a crime of rage. It was timing. Investigators believe the moment he decided to reclaim control of his life was the moment he became a liability. If this detail is hitting hard, take a second to like the video. It helps stories like this reach people who need to recognize these patterns before it's too late. The wife's story began to unravel piece by piece. Her timeline didn't match the digital evidence. Her version of events conflicted with surveillance footage from nearby locations. And crucially, she searched for one phrase online just hours before calling emergency services: "How long until unconsciousness?" That search turned suspicion into certainty. But motive alone isn't enough for justice. Investigators still needed to prove intent. And that proof was hiding in a place no one expected. In part 3, we're going to walk through the moment police realized this wasn't just betrayal. It was premeditation. The mistake she didn't know she made. And the evidence that turned a grieving wife into a prime suspect. Stay with me. Subscribe if you haven't already, because the truth is about to surface. And once it does, there's no going back. Welcome back. If you're still here, it means this case has already pulled you in, and it should. Because what investigators uncovered next is where everything changes. Up until this point, the case could still theoretically be explained away as a tragic accident, a medical emergency, a misunderstanding, a grieving wife in shock. But real crime cases don't fall apart because of emotions. They fall apart because of details. And this case unraveled because of one mistake she never realized she made. Before we go further, I want to ask you something. Do you believe people slip up under pressure, or do you think guilt always leaks out eventually? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed, because stories like this don't end the way you expect. Investigators revisited the emergency call, not just the words, but the timing. She claimed she found her husband unresponsive and immediately called for help. But phone records told a different story. There was a gap. Nearly 20 minutes passed between the moment her phone last accessed the internet and the moment she dialed emergency services. 20 minutes where nothing happened, or more accurately, where something did. During that window, detectives believe she attempted to clean up. The kitchen trash contained wipes with chemical residue. The bathroom sink showed signs of hurried rinsing. And most damning of all, his phone had been moved. Digital forensics revealed it had been unlocked after the estimated time of death. That alone raised a terrifying question. Why would someone touch a device if they believed their partner was still alive? Her explanation didn't help her case. She said she was panicking. She said she didn't know what to do. She said she was trying to call family members. But none of those calls existed. What did exist were deleted messages. Messages she didn't know could be recovered. When investigators restored them, a pattern emerged that made even seasoned detectives uneasy. She had been venting, not emotionally, but strategically. Messages to a close friend described feeling trapped, financially threatened, and angry that he thought he could just walk away. One message stood out: if he leaves, everything collapses. That wasn't fear. That was motive. At this point, investigators brought in a behavioral analyst. The conclusion was chilling. This wasn't a spontaneous act. It was reactive planning. When someone doesn't plan murder far in advance, but the moment control is threatened, they calculate fast. And the evidence supported that theory. The substances found in his system weren't taken daily. They were administered once, in a controlled dose, at a specific time. Someone didn't want chaos. They wanted certainty. If this detail is making you rethink what normal relationships look like, hit the like button. It helps this story reach others who may recognize these red flags in their own lives. When police formally interviewed her again, the cracks widened. Her tone changed. Her answers became shorter. She began asking questions instead of answering them. Classic deflection. And then came the moment that sealed her fate. An investigator casually mentioned something they hadn't made public: the exact substance found in his blood. Her reaction was instant. She corrected him. She named it herself. A substance she shouldn't have known about. The room went silent. From that moment on, the investigation shifted gears. This was no longer about what happened. It was about how to prove it beyond doubt. Because betrayal isn't always loud. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it cries on command. And sometimes it waits until escape becomes impossible. In the final part, we'll walk through the arrest, the courtroom revelations, and the one detail that destroyed her shocked wife. Act forever. Stay with me. Subscribe now if you haven't. This is where the mask finally came off. By the time the case reached court, the story everyone thought they knew had completely collapsed. The grieving wife narrative, the shock, the tears, the confusion, was no longer convincing anyone. Because the prosecution didn't rely on emotion, they relied on patterns. And patterns don't lie. From the very first day of trial, the courtroom felt heavy. The jury had already seen the emergency call. They had heard the calm tone, the oddly measured breathing, the lack of urgency that didn't match the words being spoken. But now, piece by piece, prosecutors began laying out the full picture. They started with money. Bank records showed she had quietly transferred funds weeks before his death. Not large amounts, just enough to avoid attention. She had also updated insurance information, designating herself as the sole beneficiary. When asked why, her answer was simple: we were reorganizing finances. But the timeline didn't agree with her. Next came the expert testimony. A toxicologist explained that the substance found in her husband's system required precise timing. Too little wouldn't work. Too much would be obvious. What was used sat exactly in the middle, strong enough to stop his heart, subtle enough to delay suspicion. That wasn't an accident. That was intent. Then the prosecution played the interview footage. Side by side, her first statement and her second. In the first, she said she found him slumped on the couch. In the second, she said he was in bed. In one version, she claimed she shook him. In another, she said she was afraid to touch him. Small differences, but murder cases don't hinge on big lies. They hinge on changing ones. If you're watching this and thinking, that could never happen in my home, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, how well do we really know the people closest to us? Drop your thoughts in the comments. These conversations matter. The defense tried to redirect. They argued stress, mental exhaustion, marital pressure. They suggested she had snapped. But snapping doesn't explain preparation. Snapping doesn't explain cleanup. And snapping doesn't explain why she researched toxic substances on a shared device weeks earlier. Searches she believed were deleted. When that evidence hit the screen, her body language changed instantly. No tears, no shaking, just stillness. Psychologists later described it as emotional withdrawal, a sign someone knows the performance is over. The jury didn't take long. The verdict came back guilty. No dramatic outburst, no collapse, just a slow exhale, as if she had been waiting for it. During sentencing, the judge spoke words that silenced the room. This was not a crime of passion. This was a crime of possession. She didn't kill because she hated him. She killed because she refused to lose control. And that distinction matters. Because family betrayal crimes are some of the most dangerous, not because they're violent in the moment, but because they're invisible until it's too late. Behind closed doors, behind shared routines, behind trust. If this case shook you, if it made you rethink what warning signs look like, hit the like button. It helps this channel bring these stories to light. She is now serving a life sentence. No interviews, no appeals with substance, just silence. And the legacy she left behind isn't the one she wanted. It's a reminder that love without respect becomes ownership, that control dressed as care is still control, and that sometimes the most dangerous place isn't the street, it's home. Before you go, I want to ask you one final question. What do you think was the biggest red flag that everyone missed in this case? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you want more deeply researched, psychological true crime stories like this, subscribe to the channel now. Because the next case is already unfolding somewhere, and the signs are never as obvious as we hope.